Welcome to the Prophecy Club. In 21 years on the radio, I never had given my testimony in terms of how I got into all of this. So for the last 2 or 3 broadcasts, I've been telling you, first of all, how I got into Bible prophecy, how I met Dimitri Duduman, how I met Henry Gruver. Now we're going to talk about how I met Ron Wyatt and the trip that Leslie and I took over to the Middle East, a 2-week tour where we saw some amazing things. We were living in Omaha at the time, and as I said, I was working with Full Gospel businessmen in some of their meetings, and so I'd kind of become a hub of, hey, you get Stan the name, and he can invite these guys in. And I had someone hand me an audio tape of Henry Gruver meeting Ron Wyatt. And long story short, we invited Ron Wyatt in. He stayed in our home. He gave his presentation that night. A few months later, we got a letter in the mail that was inviting us to come on a tour with him, and we were going to go see some of these things he was talking about. For example, we went to Mount Megiddo, that is overlooking the Valley of Jezreel, which is where Armageddon takes place. We also went to Gomorrah and picked up a handful of brimstone. We also went to the tomb of Jesus and heard the story about the archaeological evidence as to why that really was the tomb of Jesus. We also saw the skull of Golgotha. But while we were there at the tomb, Ron asked us all to sit down, about 28 of us on the tour. This is in 1991. He began to tell us how he discovered the Ark of the Covenant, January 6, 1982 at 2 p.m. Now, you're going to hear some hollering and bellowing in the background. That is the Muslim call to prayer. So if you don't like it, if you don't want it here in America, then you better get lots of people saved and also stop folks from voting for Muslim Democrats like Obama that would love to be able to bring that in. Now, it's very important that you know that I believe that he was really telling the truth. As you know, I used to be a public speaking instructor for 13 years. I have literally heard thousands and thousands of 60-second and 2-minute talks. When someone is telling a made-up story, the movements are not there. In other words, like if they're telling how they rode a bicycle, they're probably not going to be moving their hands back and forth. But if they were really on that bicycle, and especially if they were doing something like falling down or falling over or going over down a hill, then you would see their hands maybe moving back and forth as they're reliving the incident. When I was there, I noticed Ron reliving the incident. I believe he is telling the truth. Now, here's the story out of his own words. And it was back in 1991 of how he discovered the Ark of the Covenant. And yes, this VHS that I taped in June of 1991 is now still on DVD. And even though the DVD or the VHS now to DVD is 23 years old, I will still say you will be very happy if you call and get it. And yes, it is available at your Prophecy Club. Now let's go listen to Ron Wyatt giving his testimony of how he discovered the Ark of the Covenant, January the 6th, 1982 at 2 p.m.
One day, I was walking along this escarpment with an archaeologist friend of mine. And those of you that know me, I am not given to salubrious soliloquies or sepulchral solicitudes. I am hard-headed, hard-nosed, and I want to know the facts. And that's all I want to know. But as I was walking by, my left arm pointed to a dump under the wall or the escarpment, and my mouth said, that's Jeremiah's grotto and the Ark of the Covenant is in there. Well, I love the Israelis, but they're not overly generous, and I think our friend here will agree. But this man said, that's wonderful. We will let you excavate. We will give you a place to stay. We will give you all the help you need. We will provide your food, and we will do your laundry. How many times does an Israeli offer that to a goyim? Not often. So anyway, I was flabbergasted. I had not even thought about the Ark of the Covenant or Jeremiah's cave or none of that stuff, okay? So anyway, I said, later I will maybe do this, but now I've got to go home. So I went home and I dug through history books and all of this. I found out that this city, at the time of the vanishing of the Ark of the Covenant and the other major furnishings of the first temple, when they vanished, the city was surrounded by a siege wall. 2 Kings, 25th chapter, Nebuchadnezzar cast forts against the city round about. And the Hebrew simply means a siege wall. Titus did the same thing. Part of Titus's wall has survived to the north. They were built out of range of the catapults in the city. Catapult ology had not advanced since Nebuchadnezzar's time, and the Roman catapults, or that period of time, they had about the same range as the one in Nebuchadnezzar's time. So we can conclude that Nebuchadnezzar's wall was about where Titus's was. Now then, the Ark of the Covenant vanished out of this besieged city. Some people say it was taken to Mount Horeb. Some people say that Solomon's son, by the Queen of Sheba, snookered him into making a replica, and he traded. But the Shekinah glory didn't leave until about 586 BC. This man might have snookered Solomon and everybody else around, but he could not snooker the Shekinah glory. So that did not happen. Now then, the only place short of God blinding part of the Babylonian army and having his people, some of his people, take this out and hide it, was that it had to be hidden in the city or inside this siege wall. Okay? Now then, the city is being systematically excavated down underneath the tunnels, the caves, and everything with very scientific methods. Now then, I went to the Israeli archaeological authorities, including the gentleman I was speaking with. When my mouth said something my brain, shall we say, didn't go along with or had no idea about, and I explained how it had to be in one of these inside that siege wall, and I thought that it was there from my research. So they gave me a permit based on that. And we started digging. And as we dug, we found cutouts in the cliff face where 3 public signs related to the crucifixion were set up when a well-known criminal was to be crucified. Now, this arrangement I always thought was just for Christ. It was not. This is how the Romans did it. And they had captured Barabbas, who had stirred up a lot of trouble in the area, rebelled and tried to overthrow the government. He didn't have a lot of luck, but he tried it. And so he was sentenced to be crucified, and he was to be crucified in a very public manner. Now, some say on a hill far away. This is a hill far away. It's a little bit below the crest because they made a quarry through here. But it's still on Mount Moriah. Now then, they always crucified people right along with the side of a very busy road where the most people would see the crucified, because it was meant to intimidate anybody that would be thinking about trying something. And they put the language or the name of the person and what they were accused of in the chief local languages. In Jerusalem, it was Hebrew, Greek, and Latin, or Roman. And there's 3 cutouts there. Now then, in other cities, they put up whatever languages were used there, but it was always Roman, was one of those languages. Now then, as we excavated down the escarpment, found these cutouts. The wall that was on the outside away from the cliff face got so high and teetery that we decided to sink a shaft down to see what strata we would find. We did this, and we turned the samples in appropriately. We did carbon-14 dating on the charred wood that we found at different levels. We turned in the mortars and pestles, and the last one I handed in, they said this is 10,000 years old. Jebusite, of course. But anyway, when we got down to the bottom, we came back up to where this thing, the ledge of the cliff, it had been cut down into. Anyway, the Roman level was at the top of this thing, and everything below that was pre-Roman. So we went along in a horizontal shaft along the cliff face, carefully documenting everything as we went. Any archaeologist that doesn't do this is a criminal, because people deserve to know what happened here and what was found. Not some made-up story, not some things that were carried in from another dig and put here so they can say, well, we found this here, this proves such and such. There's a lot of that goes on. And in school, they teach you, you do not go out and dig to see what is there. You decide what is there, and then you see to it that that's what you find. See, this is what they teach you in school. So anyway, we went along this wall at the Roman level. We found Roman coins, we found Roman glass, we found Roman pottery, all this stuff. We turned all of this in. It's in boxes over in the basement, our storage area at the Rockefeller Museum. Unless somebody came along and decided it wasn't any good and they had too much of that sort of thing anyway. Now then, as we went along, I found this cutout rock. And I thought, man, that's unusual. So I picked the thing up and I noticed that there was a depression under there. So I started digging carefully down through there, and it was just some debris. But it was a cross hole filled with debris. And apparently, when these cross holes were not in use for crucifixion, they had plugs that they put in them so horses or people walking by wouldn't break a leg, and so they wouldn't fill up, and they'd have to clean them out every time they were going to use them. So anyway, I was told to put that in a safe place, which I did. And it's still in a safe place. But anyway, it dawned upon me that this had to be where Christ was crucified, because this was 12 feet below these cutouts in the cliff face, and it was at the Roman level, because we found coins of Tiberius and some others. We know that that was open to the public for several years, including the point in time when Christ was crucified. Now then, as we were working there, we noticed a crack in the cliff right by the left side of where this cross hole was. Well, that didn't mean a lot, because this thing has been fractured considerably, and if you'll look along this escarpment, there's a lot of cracks in there. And the Bible says that when Christ died, there was an earthquake and the rocks were rent. Okay? Now then, today I know that that crack occurred at that moment in time. Then I didn't know that. What was I excavating for? What was I looking for? What was my permit about? It was to see if the Ark of the Covenant had been hidden in this escarpment. And I had people that I had to report to periodically. Now then, I was running out of money, and it was time to go home. And I prayed, Lord, what shall I do? And I was impressed to break right through the cliff face. And that seemed very ignorant to me. So I kept looking around, and I found some very old buildings, old foundations, old altar stones, which I left in place, as any good archaeologist will do. And when we got ready to go, the day before we were to fly out, my oldest son, it was his turn down in the hole, and we were passing our tools out to store them. And he said, Dad, you always pray about things. Why haven't you prayed about this so you'll know where to dig? And I said, I have. And he says, well, what happened? And I said, I was impressed to break through this wall. Like, you know, that settles that. He said, well, why don't you do it? You've done dumber things than that before. So I said, well, okay. So I had him holler up at my youngest son, pass the tools back down. So anyway, here this crack was in the cliff face that went right by the left side of the wall. I decided if I had made my chisel crack over here, that I could just pop this out. So then I'd have a nice piece that I could put back and wouldn't damage anything. And so we did this, and we popped this out. And way back in back into that crack was a dark hole about like this. Well, I said, give me the flashlight. So I shined it back in there, and here was this cave chamber. Well, I thought the Ark of the Covenant has got to be sitting right back there, and I went off into Never Never Land. I mean, goosebumps, swimmy head, and the whole bit. So we quickly enlarged the hole and got in. Well, the Ark of the Covenant wasn't sitting there. So I worked and worked and poked around in this little hole and that little hole and followed this erosion path through the limestone. Finally, the 6th of January, 1982, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, something else the archaeologist always does. When you enter a chamber where you think something might be, you look at your watch and you make a note of that. It may be important. If you don't find anything in there, you can forget about it. But you should look in case. So I did that. I went in there. Nothing but rocks. Now then, ordinarily I would have crawled right back out of that place, but my sons had gotten double pneumonia, walking pneumonia. They were running fevers of about 104. So was I. But anyway, I sent them home, and I decided that I was either going to find that this trip or die in the hole. I really did. That's not very bright, but when you're sick enough, it seemed very logical to me. And so anyway, I got this little Arab guy. He was just about so big, and he was marvelous at getting into places and shining the light around so I could see if they were empty or if they had anything in there. And so we went along like this, and we came to a little hole where the water had eroded a bit through there, and there was a stalactite hanging right down over the hole. So I took my hammer and I carefully tapped it at the base and laid it aside so we would have that for future reference if necessary. And then I made the hole big enough for him to get in. And this is the way we had been working. So he crawls in there, and I start to hand the light back in there to him. Here he came out terrified, absolutely terrified. And if I hadn't got out of his way, I honestly believe he'd have taken me apart getting out. He was mindless terror. That made me suspect there was something special in there. So he said, "What's in there? What's in there? I'm not going back in there." Well, that was fine by me, but I made the hole big enough so I could get in there, and that is the only reason that I looked in that cave, because it looked very unpromising. So I crawled around on these rocks. The place was full of them, about 18 inches of clearance to the ceiling. And I shined my light down through the little openings down through the rocks. I saw a spot of gold here, and I saw a spot of gold there, and I saw a spot of gold there, and my heart started pounding like you wouldn't believe. And I started taking these rocks and sticking them here, there, and everywhere. I actually ended up with rocks behind my shoulders back here. And here was a gold veneered table. I thought, that's the table of showbread. Later, I found out by reading the book of Samuel a little more carefully that Solomon made 10 more of them, besides the one that Moses had Bezalel make out in the wilderness. So now I don't know if that was the copy or the real thing. At that point in time, we didn't know that. Well, I happened to notice this stone box right in front of me, and the lid cracked right here. Well, I thought there's got to be something special in this box. And so I kind of looked up to see what I could do to get rid of some more rocks, and I saw some brown, dark brown stuff. And I looked on up the wall, and here it had come through a crack. And down the wall, and on that broken area of that lid, suddenly it all came together. The cutouts, the cross hole, the crack, the Ark of the Covenant, and Christ's blood on the mercy seat. 45 minutes later, I came to enough that I carefully put everything back, crawled out of there, sealed up the hole. Now, I can't get anything out of there but small objects, okay? But we have been cutting a large shaft down that's big enough to bring these things out. What they had done was to carry this stuff in there, lay animal skins over it, and then wood over that, and then fill it full of stone. Why they did that, I do not know. I can understand the animal skins, I can understand the wood, but why the stones? So anyway, the significance of that is this. In Psalm 77:13 it says, "Thy way, O God, is in the sanctuary." Now see, God doesn't just say things to fill up a book. We might, if we're writing a book, say a few things just to fill up a page or another paragraph. He does not. His way is in the sanctuary. On the Day of Atonement, when the goat that represented Christ as the sin bearer, all of the sins that had accumulated in the sanctuary for that entire year were figuratively transferred to its head by the high priest. That animal was killed, its blood was taken into the most holy place and sprinkled on the mercy seat. The thought had never entered my mind, people. But when I saw that, I knew it could be no other way but that Christ's blood had to go on that mercy seat. So type met antitype, and it's not that many feet from where you're sitting today. Now then, you have seen Noah's Ark. How many of you here think that you have seen Noah's Ark?
Yeah.
Okay. And I know that y'all are not goofy and you're not snookerable, if you please. Everything that is in the Old Testament happened. After you leave here, we'll show you the crossing site and a column that Solomon set up with an inscription on it. The Egyptians chiseled that inscription off, or it eroded away after the stone fell into the water, into the surf. But on the Saudi Arabian side, there is another column that has the inscription intact. Out to Jabal el-Lawz in Saudi Arabia is a big, solid, one stone altar, 12 big pillars of stone, thousands of little stone circles with a common courtyard closely associated with the migration of the Habiru, pottery, and a white marble shrine dedicated to the mountain of God by King Solomon and inscribed in archaic Hebrew or Phoenician script. So anyway, God has done all of these things, and He has done it in a manner, as soon as these are all documented and presented to the world, everybody is going to know that the flood is not a myth. The crossing of the Red Sea is not a myth. We have found horses' skeletons, people's skeletons, 18th dynasty chariot parts. If you haven't seen them, we have them on video so you can see them. But all of this is real, and Christ is real, and His blood is on the mercy seat within a stone's throw of where you sit today. I don't know about you, but it's wonderful to know that God has done all of this for us, and it's wonderful that He has left enough evidence around to convince anybody that will be convinced. Okay, thank you. That's all I have to say.
Did you get a chance to look in that stone box with a crack in it?
We have been doing some work since, but this I have been ordered to keep my mouth shut about. You see, I exist in a very special situation. I can share this with you, and people that believe the Bible know that it had to be that way. They have no problem accepting this. People that don't think I'm one of the biggest liars that ever hit the street. Well, I can live with that. But I know this, that when it is God's time, in Ephesians 1:10, it said, in the dispensation of fullness of time, God subdued all things unto himself through Christ Jesus. And in Matthew 24, it said, when the fullness of the time had come, God sent forth his Son. This simply says that God has a time schedule, and it will happen at that time. It will not happen before, nor after, but exactly at that time. So I can rest in peace. This doesn't mean I go home and just wait for God to tap me on the shoulder and say, go do something. I keep trying the knob because I'm very anxious, you see. But anyway, it will all come about in a manner that the whole world will see the gospel, God's last warning to planet Earth. And then those that see the truth and love that truth and cherish that truth can go to the Father in the name of the Son, and by the Son's blood receive cleansing from that law under which we are all condemned to death. And not only can they receive forgiveness, but we can receive rehabilitation. Let's face it, folks, we are not nice people. In our minds are all kinds of things. Thievery, lies, and it could go on and on.
Well, I'm going to break in right there as we have run out of time. But in case you're wondering, yes, this videotape that is some 23 years old. I shot it back in June of 1991. You might be saying, well, why in the world would I want to see that? I promise you, you will be fascinated. And no, I'm not talking about the fact that I didn't have any gray hair in those days. I'm talking about when you see all of these things that we saw on that tour, all summarized in this about a 2-hour videotape, I think you will be amazed. You'll say, well, this is one of the best investments you've ever made. So here's how you get it. You can go to prophecyclub.com, or you can call 785-266-1112. Now listen carefully. This is what you want to order. Archaeology Confirms the Bible. Archaeology Confirms the Bible. prophecyclub.com or 785-266-1112. You can get it in VHS or DVD. Yes, I understand you're probably going to get it in DVD, but that's fine. 785-266-1112 or prophecyclub.com. I promise you will love it. Even though it's not all that professional, it's kind of amateur, but it has some really good stuff on it. Call today. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your prayers, and thank you for your gifts of support. God bless. Now from the Prophecy Club, some exciting opportunities for you. In 1980, an angel came to Dmitri Duduman and told him that it is written in the Bible and that America will be defeated in 1 hour by Russia. I just made a brand new DVD covering all of the secular, real-life proof that Russia really is preparing to do exactly that. Topics are: Arise, Devour Much Flesh, Russia and Prophecy, Russia Now Rich and Strong, Russia's numerous military expansions, Ukraine, and how it is making the bear angry. Russia is warning the U.S., but we're not listening. Russia is building their military, modernizing submarines, aircraft, missiles, and their army, while the U.S. is downsizing and filled with traitors and weaknesses. 2.5 hours, gift of $30. Go to prophecyclub.com or call 785-266-1112. That's The Russian Bear Rises at prophecyclub.com or 785-266-1112. Order today.